All right. Hello and welcome, everyone. This is James Orr, and I am joined today by Tom Shallcross from Chicago. Tom, are you with me?
I am.
Well,
Happy to be
thanks.
here.
Yeah. Thanks again for coming on. We really do appreciate you taking the time to kind of walk us through a deal that you've analyzed, and I think this is one that you bought. So I won't take up any more time. But where'd you find this deal? I guess is probably a good starting position.
Sure. So this is in an area of Chicago I really like. This was purchased direct from the seller. So we have in this little pocket, we target absentee owners. So there's 2 units, 3 units, preferably out of state, which this lady was, and then obviously send both direct mail and then phone calls, and that's what got her interested. She was actually looking to sell, so timing was good on this, and yeah, we ended up taking this one down.
Okay, so that's interesting. So let's pause there for a second. So you're doing a lot of direct mail to, in this case, absentee owners, people where the tax address is different than the property address. So they're getting their tax bill at another address, and so you're doing direct mail to them, and you're sending out a bunch of, is it postcards? Is it letters? What are you primarily doing there?
Yeah, I'd say it's not a ton. Like this is not we don't live and die by direct like some other guys do, but
Okay,
in little pockets that we really like, we will spend money to do it.
okay,
And then ideally if in my ideal world, I hire that right virtual assistant. I'm not at that point yet. I'm still the
hmm,
guy trying to make calls and fit that into my schedule, which is not, I understand, not the most productive use of my time.
sure,
Um, but I think, that's kind of differentiator because these people are getting so much mail. The other two avenues are you hit them up on the phone
hmm,
or you create a very, you have the appropriate SEO. So when they are ready, they go and they find you, or they see someone else's mailer and they go to the website and they find you.
perfect. And so you're doing, is it primarily postcards? Are you doing letters? What are you using? Usually send it in the mail.
We have a generic postcard.
Okay,
And it's basically not so much like we buy cash, we buy cash and we buy fast. It's more like, hey, have you thought about selling?
okay,
And here's when you go to sell your house. Here's the realtor fees, like kind of just breaking it down more logically than the more in your face that I think most guys are doing. You're gonna have this many people going through the house, especially if it's a duplex or a 3 unit, like a lot of the ones we're targeting. You know, you have to coordinate with the tenants while you're out of state. Like there's a hassle factor there.
yeah.
So we try to play more of that logic factor that, hey, this is an easier way to do it, and we can still get you a good number that would be, you know, basically similar to what your net would be if you went through this process and paid the commissions and had to get everything from an inspection report fixed and et cetera.
Okay, cool. So that's sort of your pitch is you're going to net about the same, except you'll have a really easy transaction. You only have to deal with us. You won't have to show your house and have a whole bunch of people sneaking through and disrupting tenants if it's got tenants in there. That's sort of your marketing message.
Correct. And if they want to go retail, like I'm not a realtor by any means, I'll refer them
Yeah.
to my guy and just say, sure, if that's the right move, and for some people it is, cool. Like, keep us in mind if things change.
Yeah, that's awesome. And are you getting your mailing list from like title company or are you using like a service?
List source.
Okay, list source, yeah, which is all title. It's public record data that they're getting usually that from, I think, from those guys.
Correct. And you can just filter it, not crazily, but you can filter it by equity or, if it's an absentee owner, if it's out of state, if it's owned by an LLC, like there's ways to do it. So like I don't want to say super targeted, but you're more targeted than just blankly hitting up a block.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, that's great. That's a really good strategy. And so you sent out what, like a couple hundred postcards to the absentee owner in the areas you want?
Correct. Yes.
Yeah, and you're getting like a couple calls, few calls. You're not getting like tons of call volume on
No,
that,
it's
right?
it's a very low ratio, and like we're not we're probably going to invest the same amount into it as we are, and not really grow it that way,
Hmm.
just because it is such a low turnaround. But it is one of the it is one of the tools in the shed to
Okay,
use.
perfect. And so someone calls in this postcard, and if you just walk me through like what your process is to get to the point where you're looking at this spreadsheet, if you don't mind.
Sure. So hey, listen, we understand you own XYZ on this street. It seems like you've been the owner for a long time. You've been out of state. You may or may not be the person to help me. But I just wanted to see, are you potentially looking to sell this in the near future? It's that simple.
Okay.
Just finding out like yes or no right off the bat. And usually they're not going to say yes. They're going to say, hey, who are you, or what's going on? Or like, I got this in the mail. I'm somewhat interested. There's going to be just the opportunity then to just open up and have that conversation and build some
Perfect.
rapport.
And then are you filling out your spreadsheet while you're on the phone with them? Are you taking the intake form?
No, absolutely not. No, it's much more focusing and listening to what they're
Right.
saying. What are the pain points? What are they looking to do? Just get a rough idea of, okay, what are you looking to, is there a number in mind? Is there some sort of dependency on the time frame? Do you need money by X? It's I never try to do this on the fly and make some sort of one night offer. Like, we're not that big of a shop. We take each lead and kind of coddle it and make sure that we're giving them all our attention.
Yeah.
Um, so the other thing too is, like, if you try to do that, the big part here is, like, we're usually doing heavy rehabs.
Hmm.
So it's almost impossible to do that over the phone. You can make your guesses, but, like, you can be way off there. Like, you need to go in there and see the property at some point anyways. So there's really not, they can say, well, I want to sell it for 50K. I want to sell it for 100K. And both numbers might work, because the 100K might only need 10K in rehab and the
Yep.
50K might need 50K in rehab. Like, you gotta, in my opinion, at least with the people I deal with, it's one part of the equation. So I'm much more listening and having a real conversation with them and figuring out what are they looking to do, and whether I can help or not. Like, okay, that's the baseline. That's what we're going to do. Let's take a look at the property and see if it's worth our time.
Awesome. Yeah, that sounds like normal process to me. So I definitely appreciate sharing that. Do you want to start walking us through your spreadsheet, and then I'll kind of dig into some additional questions as they kind of come up when you're putting in your numbers?
Sure. So these are actually the final numbers that I kind of worked up, and I guess I can talk through the logic behind what I do, and then also just kind of compare, like, hey, how did this play out to what I assumed, right? But whether good or bad, we came up heavy or light on some things.
Yeah.
Um, I think anytime we go to do any sort of analysis like this, I always ask off the get go, like, what's the actual plan, right? Like, it's not so much like, oh, this thing cash flows, let's buy it. What is, like, the ultimate goal? And it's different for every investor. For me, it's getting to a net worth of X. Okay, is purchasing this, is this going to help me get there? And then what are the risks on the road to get there? A property that has 150K rehab is going to carry different risks than a property that has 100K rehab,
Sure.
or and then a 50K and so forth.
Hmm.
So, kind of just before even diving into the spreadsheet, just I like to look at things a little bit more holistically, and then dive into the numbers and say, okay, let's talk about it. Let's do this. We ended up purchasing this for 67K, which you can see in cell B2 there. Original number, the seller was very tight-lipped here. I kept trying to get out, like, a feeler of, what are you looking for? What are you looking for? And finally I said, hey, I need to know, because I'm going to base my rehab off of what you need. I want to make, there's an all-in acquisition cost that I can afford. I need to understand what you want so I can understand what I can do with rehab. And she was looking to get roughly about, like, 85,000, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, 80, 90K, somewhere in there. And from going back and forth and talking through, like, hey, this is all the work that needs to be done. Here are some comps that have sold in the area. Like, this, I don't want to pay that number. You don't want to accept my original offer. Like, let's find some middle ground here that makes this work. And we ended up settling at that 67K that you see there.
Okay, so let me pause you there for a second. So originally on the first phone call, she throws out a number of 85K after you have to push a little bit in order to get that number. Is that pretty
I don't
much how
even
it went
think I
down?
had, that's how you should do it. I don't even think
Oh,
I had that number going in to see the property.
okay. Okay,
Like,
so this is
like I
like,
think I was still blind at that point, which could be a huge waste of time. That's probably, not sound advice. But yes, at some point, I finally got the number out of her of, like, hey, I need to know. I'm trying to run numbers here. I I don't want to waste your time, or nor my time. Like, what do you want here, so we can try to make this happen?
and this was when you're meeting them at the property for the first time.
She's out of state, so she's not at
Oh,
the property.
okay. So you did the first phone call, you schedule time to go see it, then you call back and you ask her for a number at that point. Is that how it went down?
Correct.
Okay, and she gave you 85.
Yeah, it was somewhere. Yeah, somewhere in that range there.
And had you run your numbers after you'd seen the property so that you knew that 85 wasn't going to work for you, or were you
That
plugging
is
those?
correct. After I see the property, and especially, we are pretty specific in the areas we invest. So a lot of these things are plug and chug, like the property taxes, the insurance. Like, a lot of these are, almost rollovers every time. There's little intricacies here and there. But no, once you get that rehab number, then your all in cost. The three main variables: what are you going to purchase it for?
Mhm.
What's it going to cost to rehab? And what is it going to appraise at? Right? Like, once you have those three numbers, you can pretty much figure out if this is going to pencil out or not. Assuming you understand what the rents are in that market, and owning several properties in that area, like, the rent part's pretty easy, pretty straightforward.
Okay. Okay, yeah. So let's continue on. So basically, she named 85, and did you throw out a lower number than the 67 originally? It sounded like you did from what you said a second ago.
Yeah, I'm going from memory here. It probably wasn't much lower. It was probably around like 60,
Okay.
just to say like, hey, like, this is where I'm at, and here are the reasons why. Here's all the rehab I'm going to do. Here's everything that I need to make this work. I'm gonna assume holding costs on this. I'm also gonna get you cash, immediately. So, and you're not gonna have to pay your 6% on the realtor fees, et cetera, et cetera, like the usual pitch that you would hear from most people.
Hmm.
And she was still lower than what she wanted. It In retrospect, like I don't think she really knew. It wasn't like I need 85K, like my mortgage is 80 or anything like that. It was, I think this is what I can get for it. And so we went back and forth. There wasn't a huge negotiation, and we finally ended up at that 67K.
Okay. All right, good. So you had the 67K, and that on that second phone call that you came to an agreement, or was it multiple phone calls and you know?
No, multiple phone calls. She thought about potentially listing it, and we
Okay.
had those conversations back and forth. And um, I would say it's probably over a month of time from the time I saw the property, from the time we actually got under the original contract was probably a month.
Okay. And did you know if she actually met with some real estate agents to try to find out what she'd be able to list it for and might be able to net?
I don't think she did anything official. I think she probably did a little bit due diligence on like what the ARVs would be,
Okay.
and just to see like, oh, if it's fixed up, it's this. Like, I think she just wanted to make sure that we were in the right ballpark. She wasn't getting taken advantage of, right?
Yeah.
Like, okay, this makes sense.
And did you provide her some comparables to show her like if it were fixed up, this is what it would be, or you let her do that in her own?
So I let her do that on the own. I'm always careful to do that because if I show her some of mine, and when we just to digress for a second, like
Yeah.
we do pretty heavy rehabs on these property, and then demand top market rent for the area. Like
Right.
that's our strategy and our game plan. So if I show her one of my properties and say, hey, I own this one down the street, it's going to be one of the higher ARVs in the neighborhood, right? Like
Right.
that's good for her, bad for me. So
Yep.
I usually do offer it. I say, hey, just pull up the MLS and see what's out there. You're going to see some selling. In this example, you're going to see things selling at 120. You're going to see things selling at 170. It's all dependent on that rehab number, and that kind of circles back to like that's why I need to know what your purchase price, what you're asking for, is because then I can kind of play with my rehab number to see what is the strategy. What's going to be my plan for taking this down and making it work.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, good. So you went out there, you met with your people at the property, or just you went to the property to kind of estimate your rehab costs?
So I pull in my GC, my partner. Sometimes I'll walk it and take videos and get his idea for it, but like
Hmm.
I need his final blessing. I don't want to sign him up for something where I think, oh, this is 50K, and he goes, no, Tom, it's 80 because you're an idiot. Stick behind a desk.
Yeah. So the 63.5, is that like a firm number? Like
That was
that's your
final. So you're seeing final here.
okay.
Good news was our estimate was 60. So on a 60K rehab to be at 63.5, like I feel pretty good about that.
Sure.
And usually when we run our numbers, we'll just add that 10% contingency just because that's what happens, right? Like if you say something's going to be 100, odds are it's going to be 110.
So is
Um,
that your comfort level? Your comfort level with your rehab estimates is about 10%. Is that what you're seeing for yourself?
Correct. And I would
Okay.
say, I would say that's correct. And I would also say like, if the equity spread is larger, so like in this example, like if I knew that it would appraise for 200K or something crazy, I would take on more risk in that rehab number. But for what we do, I'm usually comfortable with that 10% variance.
Can you explain what you mean by that? So you're saying if there's a bigger equity spread from what you're purchasing for after rehab and everything else compared to what you think it's going to appraise for, you're willing to do what with the rehab costs exactly?
So here, let's run through like some real numbers, an
Yeah.
example here. So I ended up being all in on this thing for like 140, and it
Okay.
literally was like almost 140 on the dot. Like it's a few $100 off here.
Hmm.
This appraised at 176, which is a 36K equity spread, which is great. I take that all day long on a property this size.
Yep.
If you, it's almost a true BRRRR, but when you factor in like the closing costs and the holding costs, like you do leave a little bit of money in the deal. But it's a great deal, like from an equity standpoint.
And for those people that don't know what BRRRR is, it's buy, rehab, rent, refi, and then repeat.
Yeah, I'm glad you did it because I would have been stumbling
Yeah,
around.
I go with all those R's. They merge together in my head. I almost have to like do it in order in my head when I'm doing it. And so yeah, so that's what you're trying to do. Is that your primary investing strategy? Then to buy a property where after you do the rehab, you could rent it out and then try to pull as much, if not all, of your money back out. Correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
And I guess one point around that is like people say, like, oh, that's leverage so high. And it's like, well, no, I'm still leveraged at 75% of what the property is worth.
Hmm.
Like I'm not taking out 90% loans or any, not that you could on a refi like this, but it's not about over leveraging. It's about buying at the right price and running your numbers on the front end so that you can create that spread that you see here between the 140 and the 176.
Hmm.
That's what allows you to pull out most of your money.
Right. Yeah, so you were gonna, and I interrupted you. I apologize about that. You were gonna explain to me with real numbers, like the additional risk you're willing to take on rehab and how that might play out.
Sure. So like let's say the same exact example for here, like the cells B2 to B6 is showing that we know, we know the holding, we know the acquisition price, we know the holding. But let's say my GC said, hey, this could be 60 grand. It could also be 75 grand. You know, we might have some foundation issue in the basement, whatever.
Okay.
There's a variance there that's higher than that 10%. Well, in this deal, I probably, I'd probably have to firm that up or ask for a lower price or something. Like that's too big of a variance for me.
Hmm.
But if this appraisal value, if we have other ones going for 190, 195, something like that, where there's a 50K spread, well, I can swallow a 10K. I can swallow the rehab being 75 or 80 or whatever. That, I guess that's my point, is the bigger the equity spread, the I don't want to say riskier, but the higher your tolerance for risk on the rehab.
So can I put this? I'm going to try to put words in your mouth. You tell me if I'm saying what you're sort of explaining to me. Are you saying that if the rehab could be as much as 75, you'd put in the 75 number as like an estimate there, and you'd be okay if that was still at closer to that 75% loan to value at the very end because you'd have a higher equity spread?
That is correct.
Okay.
Like if the rehab value was 75K, I probably, I don't know, I can run it right now if you want me to live, but like this deal gets a little too tight probably. You're leaving too much money in it. You still created equity. I mean, for a first time, if someone's like a first timer, it's like, hey, you still create, 20 grand of net worth, and you're still cash flowing. And, yes, but if you want to scale and continually do this, you got to be very cognizant about the money you leave in the deal. So I guess it's, for me, I'm pretty picky about that. That doesn't make it a good or bad investment for someone else.
Right. And so when you're doing your like rehab estimates, you're using the high end of the range
We're
that you're.
basically, he's basically going out there thinking what it's really going to be, not getting cute, not getting skinny. Just, I think this is what it's going to be, and we're adding 10%.
Okay. So you're not doing, and like the example you gave me, you're not saying, hey, there could be something in the basement, so I'm going to use that 75 plus 10%. You're saying, hey, listen, we really think it's 60, but it could be as much as 75 if we have something unexpected coming up. So I'm really only putting in 60 plus 10%, 66, whatever it is.
Yeah, I guess to clarify a point though, if it's going to be 60 to 75, like we need to firm that up. Like we need to get
Okay.
firm numbers. Like, I'm not someone closing a deal a week. So like I have time. We do firm ourselves up a little bit.
Okay. And the reason you feel comfortable is because your partner is a GC and his numbers tend to be pretty exact.
Yeah, exact's a strong word, but yes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, better than just someone sort of guessing at, oh, 5K for a bathroom, this for this. They're more precise than that.
That's correct. And also, these units, these are cool homes in Chicago. They're built, 120 years ago,
Okay.
which makes it challenging, but also, we've gone through these challenges before. Like some of the odder configurations and so forth, like we kind of have an idea of like, all right, this is what's going to happen. So like there's also there's the comfort level with him that's like, very important. But then a subsidiary of that is like the comfort level with these buildings, because we invest in specific areas. So it's, we've kind of gone through it before. If you
So you have
plot me down into Boston or somewhere else and I hadn't dealt with, one of those 100-year-old buildings, I'd be like, like what, I'd be putting a bigger contingency in there.
Yeah, do you mind sharing like what you do if you were going to a new market, if you said, hey, listen, I can't get enough deal flow from my little tiny farm area now, I'm going to go to a new one. What might you do differently? Is it going to be adding 20% to the rehab, or like do you have a feeling for that?
It's a good question. I think, the first thing would be just to talk to other investors and talk to property managers and just ask, how do you get screwed? Right? Just come up with that list of, for lack of better words, like what are the risks here? Like
Yeah.
when you go in, why do you go over budget on a rehab? And if 10 guys all tell you the same thing, just to account for it.
And are
Right.
you and just to be clear, are you saying you probably would try to talk to 10 people? Not that's not a hyperbole. That's like, hey, I really want to talk to 10 different people and see like where the mistakes are more than just one or two.
Correct. Like
Okay.
that time is your insurance. That time that you invest to have those conversations is your insurance policy against, an explosion later.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. All right, cool. Yeah, let's continue on. So you had 60K in for rehab. So when you did your original numbers, did you have 66 written in there?
Yeah,
Because
that
you
would
had
say 66.
okay, and so it came in at 63, which is really 3K, 3.5K over your real budget, but less than your kind of like 10% padded number.
Correct.
Okay, cool. Closing costs looks like it might be hard money or something like that. Is that what I'm seeing there?
No, so that would be under the holding cost. So the closing cost is because we have two closings. We have to close with the original
Got
seller,
it.
and then we have to close when we refi this,
Got it. Yep.
right? And you kind of, you might say, oh, $6,000's high, but like you're doing title twice. I'm unfortunately in Chicago. We got a bunch of just BS. Here's your state, here's your county, here's your city. Like it adds up.
Yeah.
And it's kind of, especially when you have smaller deals like this, because like on some, we do some larger end flips, and like we just the other week we sold one for like 560 or something, and the closing costs weren't that much different. They're a little higher, but they're roughly the same.
Yeah.
As like the smaller deal. So especially guys like deal with these smaller ones like myself, like you do have to account for them. Like $6,000 on 120K is a pretty decent sized percentage.
Yeah, and I actually want to ask you a question about that once we get done with some of your closing costs. So one question I do have about your closing costs: are you doing a hold open policy, or are you just doing two totally separate different closing costs?
Two separate different closings.
Okay,
Well, remember, I'm not closing a second time here. When I
you're
say
doing a refi.
I'm using the wrong vernacular because I'm not flipping this.
You're doing a refi though, right?
Yes, during when I refi.
And can you do a hold open for a refi?
If you can, I'm not aware of it.
Okay.
I know, I understand what you're saying. I did not. I'm unaware if you can do that for an actual refi here.
Yeah, I wonder if the title company will allow you to do that if you're using them again rather than paying the policy again. If they give you like a reissue discount rate or something like that, which they usually call the hold open policy. Yeah,
got it. See, I learned something new.
I'm curious. I don't know if they do or not. I don't do a lot of BRRRRs. We used to do BRRRR back in like I don't know 2000 2003. So yeah, I just haven't done them recently. So
got it. But
yeah, so closing cost times
cost.
two.
Yeah, and then the holding costs are your holding costs. This was actually private investor.
Okay.
So I do have a hard money line that I use that I'm very happy with. But like there's also just sometimes where it's easier just to pull in someone and say, hey, would you be interested? I think I can almost reverse engineer into this. I believe he gave me 90K and then I just did the other 30 out of pocket, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay. And if you don't mind, if you're willing to share, could you mouse over the $6,000 in closing cost times two?
Yep,
So you're just entering in that number as a manual entry. It's not like a formula based on your purchase price or anything like that.
That is correct.
Okay. What about the holding
cost? The closing costs and the holding costs are both manually entered here, because for a couple of reasons. My holding costs are a little bit different every time because I'll come out cash out of pocket for some of it if I need to. I'll use my hard money line, or I'll use private investors. All different rates, all different fees. Like, so the calculations would get pretty goofy here. When I do a flip, like what we do is, not to digress from what we're talking about here, but when we do a flip, it is actually calculated, and I'll just assume the hard money line because that's usually my most expensive.
Okay.
So it'll take like sell B2 and sell B3 that you see above there. And if they're going to give me 90%, I'll take that. I'll times it by 0.9. And I know if I'm paying 1.5, then I times that by 0.015. Like you could get, and then like you can figure out what your monthly payment would be. And then you can run almost a monthly, like here are my holding costs, adding the loan, the utilities, the taxes, the insurance, etc.
Sure.
It's just showing every month, here's your profit. And every month you're losing $3,000 or whatever the number is.
And so you're not doing that when you're doing your BRRRR spreadsheet calculations, but you do have something like that in your fix and flip type calculations.
That is correct.
Okay.
And the reason being on the BRRRR is it's a little bit, I I want to know on a flip what I'm going to make. Like I want to know, like if I hold this for 6 months, whereas if I'm doing a BRRRR, I got to have a good idea of what that is, right? If my closing costs here, or if my holding costs went to 5K, doesn't really change the deal for me here, right? Like it's, yeah, that's a little bit more money out of pocket, but like you still do this deal, like when you're doing the analysis.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
like
that makes sense to me.
it's just not as much of a variable, I guess, on these ones.
Okay. And then your holding costs, are you doing just I'm assuming it's interest only payments. You're doing just interest only payments, or is that interest only plus your property taxes and insurance and, utilities while you're doing your rehab?
No, that is true holding cost. So like,
Okay.
so it's the interest only payment, and then just all right. Well, if my taxes are 150, insurance is 150, 100, so I'm 250 a month, and it's going to be a 3-4 month hold. It's $1,000 for those, and the utilities are another 500 or whatever.
And are you assuming like a 3-month holding time or something like that?
Yeah, this one I believe was 4. Just
And
kind of
so,
reverse engineering it, and the holding costs on this are a little lower again because I only borrowed 90K, and it's no points. It was a private investor, so he's getting his, it's pretty much his money that you see there.
are you willing to share kind of just approximately what the interest rates you're seeing for your private money is when you're doing these?
Yeah, sure. So I actually just got approved for a new hard money line, so this is all fresh in my head.
Okay.
I had to get to X amount of exits to get there. But that's for me. Originally, I was paying 10. I now have a hard money line that is 8.5 and a 1.5. So 8.5 on the rate, which is great. And then if I want to go to a pure 90% acquisition and 100% of rehab, the rate goes up to like 9.5. So if I really want to borrow a lot from them, and it stays at that 1.5 upfront as well. And then for private investors, anywhere from 8 to 10%, but no points.
Okay.
And then also, it's worth mentioning, like just ease of doing business. Like
Sure.
there's no paperwork, no draws. Like you have the money. It's a little bit simpler process. So definitely willing to pay more. If I can get it for 8, great. But like definitely willing to pay higher than the hard money line for the investor.
Yeah, and for those that are out there listening, your private guys are like personal relationships, people like Aunt
That is correct.
Sally or your brother's friend who's a attorney and he's got a lot of discretionary income he's looking to place or something like that, right?
That is correct.
Okay. All right, cool. Yeah, if you want to keep working through your numbers, that's awesome. I appreciate that.
Cool. So, we worked to get like the all-in costs, which I believe this came pretty close. That 140K we have in there was pretty close to, the expected and what actually happened, which is always good to see. We got this appraised out at 176. We were hoping to get closer to 180, which isn't the end of the world. You could see we're still at a 36K spread there, right? Like, if I feel like that's for me at least, like I am very happy with that spread on a deal of this size. That's great. I'm going to skip over just to give you an idea. It's a little bit counterintuitive. Like, let's not worry about the monthly in the middle rows
Sure.
here. But if we skip over to H3, this just calculates. So when I go to refinance, so we get the tenants in there, everything's great. We go to refinance and I get 25% I get 75% loan to value of that appraisal.
Okay.
So you see like in B13, I get 132K, which is 75% of B8, which is 176.5. So I was all in for 140 if you count all my holding costs and closing costs. I got a loan for 132 and some change. So I'm all in for this thing for less than 8K.
So you're saying you're leaving $8,000 in the deal doing
That is
this?
correct.
Okay. And because you do a lot more
Sorry.
BRRRRs than I do, because I haven't done BRRRR in a while. So for you, seeing the BRRRR stuff is leaving $8,000, which is, I don't know what that is. That's like 5% of the deal, something like that, right? A little bit less than 5%. It's like 5% of the appraised value in the deal. Is that good for you? Is that like a good number to hit, or are you like disappointed in that, or like what's normal?
So for this area, I'm happy with it because I
Okay.
like this area. Like this, for some areas, like where you're more wishy-washy about, it's like, hey, I want to pull my cash out. Like I don't, it's a waste of money to have it sit there because I don't think it's going to appreciate it, and I might be selling this in 3 or 4 years or something.
And so
In this area, go ahead.
you want it to be a free house in those areas. You want to be like, you put all your money in or someone else's money in, and then when you come back out, you want to get all that back out so you have nothing left in the deal.
That is correct.
Okay.
And with this one too, like I've include like I've included the closing cost and the holding costs, and I know a lot of people don't. So they're like, "Oh yeah, I pulled all my money out." It's like, well, no, you paid $8,000 to make it
Yep.
happen. Like one way or
Yep.
another, you should account for that. Um,
Totally.
and then I don't know if it's the right way to do it, but for my cash on cash, if you see here, if you just continuing down the right side, is I include that first month. So I have a property management company. I don't manage these myself.
Right.
I include that first month expense to there, and that bumps up the total expenses to this almost 10K as you see here.
The first month's expense, what do you mean by that?
First month rent, like that's their leasing fee for getting tenants in both units.
Okay, so they're charging you 10% plus the first month's rent for the leasing fee.
8%, but yes.
Okay, so it's 8% plus the 10% plus the first month's rent for your leasing fee for putting the tenant in the property.
That is correct.
Are they charging you any like extra fees, like your share of marketing costs or your share of signs or whatever they're doing there?
No, that advertising's all on them. I collect all the late fees.
Oh, you get late fees?
That's awesome.
Oh,
That's
that's
something I
super
didn't
interesting.
realize was awesome, but it is like
Yeah, we don't
yeah,
see that around here. They get to keep late fees in our property managers around here, so that's super interesting. Okay, so you count the first month's rent as like a cost of like a sunk cost in the deal for your total amount invested.
correct.
Okay,
It's not money I'm paying, but it is like money that's not going to be there. So I think it's prudent to just account for it.
yeah, okay, that's super interesting. And the spreadsheet that you have here, is this something that you built?
Correct.
Okay,
So it's here's when I look at a deal, like I want to know the all in versus the appraised value. That's huge. Cash flow, which we haven't really talked about.
mm-hmm.
And then more importantly, I want to see the plan for 5 years. That's kind of what the next tab gets on it as well. So like,
Okay,
I know people talk about cash on cash a lot and how important it is. And like, you see this deal and you're like, oh man, the cash on cash is great. And it is because we left no money, we left minimal money in the deal.
right.
But like long term, like what does that look like? So,
Yeah,
it's that holistic view of what's the actual monthly cash flow, what's my equity spread, which will pretty much dictate the cash on cash and then also the internal rate of return. And
okay.
just kind of put all that together and say, okay, does this fit with what I want to do? It may work for someone else. It may not work for someone else, but I don't really care. Does this fit with what I want to do and what I want to accomplish?
So let me jump ahead because I definitely want to see the rest of your numbers. I would like you to walk us through the rest of it, but to kind of just like preview what is coming here is what determines whether this is a deal for you? Is it how much money you leave in the deal and then IRR? Because you sort of think of cash on cash as kind of a weird number especially when you have nothing left in the deal, or do you use some other type of metric to say this is a deal I want?
Yeah, that's a great call out. Because even when we were preparing for this, I was like, "Ooh, I had one where I had a perfect BRRRR. I was going to show you," and I was like, "Whoa, the numbers look ridiculous because cash on cash goes negative then, right?" Because
Yeah,
it's so obviously it'd be a terrible one to demonstrate.
right. Then everyone's confused. They're like, "Wait a minute, this is a bad deal. It's negative cash." Yeah, so
Yeah.
that's fine.
So I found this. I was like, "All right, this one's probably more suitable example here."
Yeah,
But yeah, so there's not like one thing I need to hit, right? There's
okay,
not like what I need this metric. Cash on cash is a little goofy. IRR is also a little goofy, I feel as well too, though, because you're guessing on what appreciation is going to do.
sure.
Like appreciation is part of that equation.
Yep,
And if you just change appreciation from 2% to 4% to
yep.
3% to whatever, that's like going to have a way bigger impact on the deal than
Yeah.
all these little things we worry about on a monthly basis.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, of the four areas of return you get when you buy investment property, appreciation's like tends to be the biggest one, but it's like mostly out of your control too. That's the hard part about it.
Yeah. So like exactly right. So like when you go to account for it in the IRR, it's like you can really fudge the numbers and make things look super sexy. Like,
That's
right.
right.
And if anyone's looking to ever invest in a deal, you need to be very cognizant of that because
Yeah.
that can really make a mediocre deal look great.
Totally.
So you need to be, you can't just, I don't rely on one factor in my head. Like I know I have to cash flow. Like, I don't think cash flow is the end all be all. Like, hey, I'll just get 200 a door and, live off that. I don't think it's that binary. I do think it's a dependency. It's the first step. It needs to happen for me. But that doesn't make my yes or no. It's just, okay, it checks the box. And then I look at, am I creating wealth here? Is there going to be an equity spread? Am I going to have to leave money in this deal? If so, how much compared to how much I'll get back? like in this example here, if I'm leaving in that 7,600 we talked about, as you
Yeah,
see in H3.
sure.
I'm getting that back in 3 years, 2 years, like 2.5 years. If I'm getting 3,300 net, as you see in H8,
Yep.
if that
Yeah,
makes sense. So like
33 or 4, sure.
yeah, so like you're pulling, I can live with that easily. Like that's for me, that's great. Take that all day long.
Yeah, so is that one of the metrics you're looking at? Is the number of years it takes for you to get all of your money back out of the deal in cash flow? Is that like a metric for you?
Correct. I'll look at
Okay.
that and say, okay, hey, how long is this going to take? Um, and again, that like it's all tied back to your all-in cost versus what's the appraised value.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah, let's if you don't mind, let's take us through the rest of the spreadsheet. I'm sure I'll have additional questions as we go.
Sure. So like let's look at like columns D and E then. These are probably the ones people are most familiar with, and probably nothing groundbreaking here, but I'll talk about my rationale. These are the actuals, but I'll talk about like how I also just put them in there.
Okay.
Um, so we get 1,100 a unit on this. That's where you get, it's a duplex, so it's
Okay.
2,200. Pretty straightforward. The
Like,
mortgage is calculated
let me pause you.
from
Let me pause you for a
like
second there. So it's a duplex. Is it like 2 bedrooms, 1 bath? What gets
two.
1,100?
They're two ones,
Yeah.
two ones, with separate washer dryer hookup and storage in the basement.
Okay.
Cool. Um, and then E5 comes from the mortgage down here. You see, it's calculated from B15. Some of you might look at it and say, "Wow, 6%, that's high." Well, I'm doing these in an LLC, so it's not. This is not, in my personal name getting 4.5%. In
Right.
2019 that people are used to seeing like this. I'm past my 10. Like this is all in the LLC, and it's when you clump them together and do like 3 or 4 properties or have a few bigger units, like I have a 6 unit or a 3 flat, like you get better rates, but it's harder to find these private guys doing just a single one off on this. So you're going to pay a little bit higher rate on it.
Are you doing arms then?
This is a new product from a lender here in Chicago that's actually fixed, but a lot of them are 10-year arm, 7-year arm, 5-year arm. This was one of the first ones I got that was fixed. So like, I don't remember the exacts on this, but I think I was able to get like 5.75 at a 10-year arm, or just take it 6 fixed all the way through.
So it's a 6%, 30-year amortized fixed interest rate loan with no balloon.
Correct, on an
That's
LLC.
that's pretty amazing, actually.
Yeah, like I'll take that all day long.
Yeah, no doubt.
Um, yeah, and there's a lot of different ways around that. And I have a local bank here that will do, I think the longest they'll go out is 7, they won't go 10. And they're usually more like 5, 5.5, but my loan size needs to be 165 or higher.
Okay.
So like they won't do any like these smaller single families or smaller duplexes that I have.
And do you calculate in your cost to do the loan in that, or is that some? Oh, that's yes, in your closing cost times two.
Correct.
Okay. So it
Yep.
can't be that expensive if your closing cost times two are 6, and we'll just assume maybe incorrectly that 3K that is on the second closing. So you're not paying that much in points and closing costs on that. Your loan amount's 132, so it can't be more than like 2 points.
Correct. I think it's a point and a half to be. I think it's the same as the hard money. I could be off. I could be
Hmm.
off on that though.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting too.
So, but yeah. So anyways, that's where the mortgage payment comes out of. You see in E5. For E6, I do vacancy at 10%. That's probably a little high. Some people are like, "Whoa, that's high, man." Well, I do that for 2 reasons. One, I'm in Cook County. This is tenant friendly. So if you got it, you never want to get to an eviction. You're going to do cash for keys before that, but
Okay.
you need to have a buffer there. So
Yep.
like, I might not have turnover for a year or two on this, but it's almost like the same as like capital expenditure. Like you just got to put that money away, knowing you're going to have it on one of your properties that you're going to have
Yeah.
to offer someone $1,000 to get out of there.
Yep.
Um, so that I'm usually a little higher on that and that number. Again, it's just calculated off of 10% of E3. Same with the management fee, just calculated off of 8% of E3. If I change that number in E3, those numbers would both change.
So what's interesting when I look at this is you're doing the 8% here for the management fee, but you do have a leasing fee that you're sort of not taking into account, except for the first one. So like when I do my
Yes, you're
spreadsheet,
right.
we actually increase that 8% to figure out, hey, listen, if we're going to have a turnover, once every X number of years, we'll just make sure that interest that management fee percentage, instead of 8, it's 9.2 or whatever it works out to be.
Yeah, so you're absolutely right, and I've thought of that, but I haven't been around long enough to have like that data of like, well, is my turnover every year, every
Sure.
3 years? Like
And it
you're
might
absolutely
vary
right though.
property to property too, right? I mean, you may be doing, you may see a single family homes you're doing in one other area have 3 years on average, and this property may be every year for all I know. I mean, I just don't know.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Like I account for it once, but then I don't. It's not accounted for on on subsequent ones,
Okay.
if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, it does.
Um, Taxes and insurance are pretty straightforward. The So we're able to push utilities. One of the things in this neighborhood, we struggle to push water onto the tenants. It's just not, no one else does it, so it's been one that we usually end up eating.
Okay.
Kind of a local thing. So it's 50 a door roughly. It ends up being 40 45 for a 2-1. So $100 there for that.
Let me
Landscaping. Go
let
ahead.
me
Sorry.
dig into it for a second. You skipped over property tax insurance, saying that those are easy, but I think they're actually a little bit more nuanced than a lot of other folks realize. So for property taxes in your marketplace, do property taxes change when you go in and rehab a property and fix it up compared to what it was before?
No, not unless you're like doing some major permits. No.
Okay, so
Now
the
they
prop.
will. We get assessed every 3 years here, and
Okay,
they always go up. And even if the property value doesn't go up, like Illinois is in so much debt, they're going to go
yeah,
up, and you're just gonna have to fight them like a whack-a-mole every time, try to bang them back down.
yeah.
so,
Yeah,
so
so as far as like property taxes, you're using what the taxes were for the year that you acquire it.
correct. And then
Okay.
in IRR, the expenses will go up by the 2%.
Okay.
Like that could be right, that could be wrong. I will know. So a couple caveats there. Homeowner exemption, senior freeze, like you got to account for all that garbage, right? Like, 'cause you're not going to get any of that.
Yep. So are
Um,
you doing that? Like if this was an owner occupant duplex and they lived in one side, are you making that adjustment when you do your taxes? Or are you still using the?
Correct.
Okay, good. And then
Yep.
for insurance, are you calling down when you're doing your initial analysis and getting a quote from your insurance provider, or are you just sort of like, hey, I've done 10 of these. The last one was $90 a month, and the one before that was 80, and so I'll use 85.
The latter, but then once we get close to closing, like when this deal is going to go through, I'll hit up the agent and say, hey, like just to validate, please send me a quote for this, just to make
Okay.
sure I don't get screwed or whatever. But
Okay.
even if it
Perfect.
comes in, 110, which would be a pretty big increase, like it's like 30%, like
Yeah.
it's a small aspect of the overall deal.
Sure. Yep. Makes sense to me. All right, cool. Sorry about that. I just want to make sure because some people they don't know that, right? Like they're going to be analyzing deals, and they're like, "So where'd you get the property tax from, or where'd you get the insurance, and how do you adjust for that?" Especially with BRRRR. So
Yeah, no, great points there. Um, and then so landscaping and snow. So this isn't the 150 is an average I use. My landscaping is basically it's going to be $35 every 2 weeks to cut the grass, if that makes sense. So
yep,
it's not exactly 70 a month because there's not 4 weeks in a month.
yeah,
But roughly it's 70 a month just for that. And then snow in Chicago is pretty pretty unpredictable. This number can be very heavy in some years and also light in other years. So just based on like historical, and by historical, I have 2 years. I don't have like 10 years of data on this.
sure,
But that's where that 150 comes from. I basically take that landscaping and double it. Some of that'll go to snow, and some of that'll go to just once in a while you gotta pay the landscaper to not just cut the grass, but also hedge the bushes or whatever.
sure,
These are small lots. Like these, I don't have giant yards on these, so it's not. Again, it's one of those ones where the numbers can't be too far off.
yeah. That makes a lot of sense. I appreciate that.
Um, we in our rehab there we have separate heating for them. That was one of the things we did. So now both tenants are responsible for heat. So that expense is on them.
Okay.
And then the capex and maintenance, and this is one that's interesting because it's it can vary crazily. So usually what I'll do, a building like this is I know like even if we take care of the roof and we take care of electric and we take care of those like I'll call them non-sexy items in the rehab, right? The ones that don't really drive aesthetic values.
Sure.
Even if we take care of that, I know I'm going to pay 1,500 to $2,000 for every building just on a window hardware broke or whatever it is. And then because I'm not self-managing, like there's a cost for the manager to go out there. Like I'm not going to go out there and fix it myself.
Right.
Right. So I have to have that pool of money there. Um, in this example, like let's say for example, I didn't do the roof. my GC said, hey, you got 3 more years, 5 more years, we can defer it till later. I would run my numbers with a smaller rehab, but then I would bump up this CapEx. Like I would, it's got to account. This isn't a perfect science, but I got to account for it somewhere, right?
Yep.
You can't just make it disappear from your rehab and then be like, oh, cool. I don't need a roof. No, you do. You just need it in 3 years as opposed to now.
Right.
So like I would make that CapEx maybe 500 a month or something. Like it's not a perfect science, but it just gives me an idea. So I don't just take like 250 for every single building and say, oh, that's what CapEx should be in this area. Because it's very dependent on the work you do up front. And then also like, it is kind of just an average. Like if you only owned 1 or 2 properties, it'd be a very tough number. It'd be very difficult to, because, you could have a hot water tank goes out and, hey, we need 4K. And it's like, well, geez, like that's all of it. But you spread that across several properties and it's much more advertised, or it's much more averaged. Sorry.
Yeah. So when you're looking at your CapEx and your maintenance reserve number, are you like sitting down with a separate spreadsheet and saying, okay, roof every 25 years or 20 years or whatever it is for you guys, hot water heater, carpet every X number of years, redo kitchen every X number of years, redo bathroom, like windows. Are you like breaking down all the components, however number of years that they're going to last for, what it's going to cost you in today's dollars, and then dividing that out to find out what yearly you should be setting aside? Or is this a much more just like seat of your pants, kind of like X percent of the value of the rent coming in?
So it's more the latter. I tried to do what you mentioned on the get-go of like, how can I just, carpet's going to be this, like you said.
Yep.
I just don't have like 5 years of data under my belt.
Right.
Like, so there's a lot of assumptions there. What I'll do is, I know that there's going to be $1,500 based off of what I have of just, I'll call it BS, like service. Like, like I said, the windowsill breaks, or, a door handle is loose, or just, no matter how much effort you do, there's going to be just that minimal amount. That's almost always like $125 a month if you average it out.
Yep.
And then if I don't take line by line, like you said, but if I left the roof, or if I left masonry work that I know needs to be done, or if I didn't change, the electric, or like, if I knew there was anything, I'll call it skeleton in the closet that's going to hit me in a few years, I got to bump the number and account for it. Whether I amortize it over 3 years, 5 years, whatever, like, you got to make that call. And then on top of all of that, you just know that there's going to be time when there's a turnover or whatever, that you're going to have to paint, you're going to have to do this, like carpets aren't going to last forever. And I just, that's an extra $1,000 a unit. I'm sorry, $1,000 a building, that I account for, which could be high, could be low. Yeah. At the end of the day, I look at it as, if you look at H17, just to jump over for a second, that's $5,600 that I have per year to cover vacancy, CapEx, maintenance calls, whatever the case may be. So that's like I'll call it just cushion I have. And then for each property I own, if that makes sense. So it's not really a cushion, because these things are going to happen, but it's like the pool I have to account for it.
Okay, so this is a super interesting conversation I have a lot of times with some of my other clients that have a bunch of rental properties in me. So the annual reserve, you're talking about H18, I think, if I'm not mistaken, the $5,640.
Yes, you're correct.
And so for that number, is that sort of like the amount you'd leave in your bank account before you take owner draws from that LLC bank account?
No, I will put a buffer on there as well.
Okay.
Right? Like, so it's separate from that. I understand where your head's going. What that number is, it's just summing up what I've accounted for in vacancy, in CapEx, and maintenance.
So you're taking your vacancy, your E6, multiplying by 12, adding that to your whatever this is, E13
times 12.
And times 12. And that's the number that you think is sort of like what you'd spend normally on your vacancy and your maintenance on the property.
Correct. And normally it's a tough word, because, right, like you might not have a vacancy for 2 years.
Sure.
But then on another property, you get someone in there and 6 months later they're gone or something. So like it's kind of average, right? Like,
yep.
But yes, like that's, I guess put it this way, if I spend this 5,600, which is kind of like a good average, a good indicator.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to net 275 a month, which is this 3,304
Per year.
So like my hard cost, I'm going to have like, 80, whatever that number is, $8,900 after paying my hard cost of mortgage, taxes, insurance, garbage, landscaping. Out of that 8,900, I'm putting 5,600 aside to cover the maintenance request, money aside for, new carpets in 2 years, 3 years, whatever it may be, cash for keys or turnover costs. Like it's kind of, I understand like in multifamily, you have this all line item out and it's very specific.
Sure.
That's a little overkill for what I'm doing on my 120K duplex here.
Okay.
So like I do want to make sure that I'm cognizant that I do have the money set aside because these things will and do happen.
Okay. So getting back to the question where I thought I was going with this. So do you have in your mind a sort of like money management guideline of 6 months of principal, interest, taxes, insurance, HOA, garbage, whatever else you've got in there, where you want to have that sitting aside somewhere? Like, what is your rule of thumb for that?
Yeah, I usually probably not the most scientific way of doing it. I usually just take the mortgage, the taxes, and the insurance. So, like in this case, you're looking at 800 plus another 150. Just call it 250. So like 1,000. I usually do 4 months just because I couldn't decide between 3 and 6.
Okay.
So like in this example, that would be like 4,500.
Okay. And would that number change? That's like one property. Would that number change if you were doing that times 10 properties? Does it go down for you? Is it like an aggregate, 50,000 across all of my properties? Or is it like every single property I need to have that 4K set aside?
So that's I'm kind of sloppy in this area, right? So like
Okay.
on some of these, I'll just be like, I just put 2,500 in there. Like I don't like calculate out, what it should be. But
Yep.
like if you're going to be, in my opinion, if you're going to be a single family, a smaller investor like myself, who my portfolio is made up of a lot of single families, duplexes. The biggest thing I own right now is a 6-unit,
Hmm.
right? So like it's a lot of deals like you see on the screen right here.
Right.
To make that work, you almost have to run it like a multifamily. It's hard to do this over 3 or 4 deals because it's a lot of guessing.
Yeah.
Right. So you almost need to get to like 20 or whatever it may be. So like I would say like out of like right now in Chicago, if I have 22 doors, I guarantee you like I don't have 88,000 or whatever that number is exactly set aside. In some areas, I probably set it aside and I used it for some of it, and I'm just like collecting the cash flow. Like it's not clean on every single deal. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Yeah,
So
that makes
like,
perfect sense.
I don't have 22 different bank accounts for each property either. So it is like a little like you got to like kind of internally do it on a spreadsheet or however you want to handle it.
Okay, so you're not doing separate bank accounts for separate LLCs.
It's a series LLC, and
Okay.
I bundle a few of these in there because because of the size of the property, right? Like
Yeah,
it's kind of silly, because these are little guys.
totally. Yeah, and you're one of the few states that allows series LLCs. It's not everywhere.
I didn't know that.
Yep. It's a Midwestern thing.
I didn't even know that Jardinera only existed in Chicago until like 5 years ago. So
What is it?
Jardinera, it's a type of topping.
Like house topping or food topping?
Food topping.
Oh, I have no idea what that is.
See?
No, I don't know what that is.
I was at a work dinner once and asked for it, and the guy looked like I was crazy. And I looked like some small dude from Hodunk, whatever.
What is it?
I'll send you the link. It's a you take a bunch of peppers and like jalapenos in there and diced carrots, and it's in like almost like it's like a spicy topping.
Like a relish, sort of?
Yeah, yeah. That's a good way to think of it. Spicier,
Okay.
and more like chunky.
Oh man, that's pretty funny.
Yeah. Anyways, when you said like, oh, it only exists in Chicago, I was like, well, yeah, that's what came to my head.
Oh, that's great. All right, cool. So I think we've kind of covered the reserve part of this. Is there anything we're missing on this front part of the spreadsheet before we move to the IRR tab?
No, not really. I think the one thing I'd point out is, the monthly cash flow on this is probably a little lower than, 275 for a duplex. Like, is that great? Is that bad? Well, I feel I'm being kind of heavy on my maintenance and vacancy, right? If you make that 5%, like you can make these numbers whatever you want. It's a spreadsheet. Like at the end of the day, it's like what's going to be real. The other thing, and I think it's kind of a missed part of like when people BRRRR, you are going to take out a higher loan because you're loaning not on the 140, you're loaning on the appraised value. So by creating that equity, you've now bumped that loan up. Like you're getting 75% of 170 instead of 140.
Yeah.
So like on the properties that I don't create the appropriate equity spread, you end up with a better monthly cash flow though, like as like a silver lining.
Yeah.
So it's one of the things like that's very simple when you say it out loud, but it's one of the things that took me a few deals to realize like, oh, this is why.
Yeah, so just something just occurred to me while you were saying that, and that is, how firm are you on your cash out refinance numbers and the availability of that loan before you move forward on the initial purchase? Did you know you were
Availability
getting
of the
that?
loan, I will firm up because I understand like this is like not a market that everyone plays in. Like that is one where I need to make sure. And now that I have a few under my belt, I feel good about that.
Yeah.
To and I kind of got burned in the past. That's why I'm very diligent about it now. Is I was working with a small local bank and everything was going fine, great rates. They keep everything in house. They're they got to know me. It was great. And after like 5, they're like, "Hey, you're tapped out with us." And I was in the middle of a hard money line. I was like, "Whoa, what do you be like?" I
Yeah.
have a renter coming in next week. Like, I'm stabilized. I'm ready to refi out.
Yeah.
And, I didn't really have a contingency plan because things were just rolling nicely with them. So I am much more cognizant of talking to lenders, just get an idea of what's out there, and even if I don't use someone on one, I'll let them know why, and I'll say, "Hey, I'll let you know about the next one." I'm very cognizant on that. With knowing the appraised value, I think was the other part of the question you asked. That is one I do my best, and I have comps in the area now, like
Yeah.
that also help, right? But I'll run the numbers just conservatively. Like here, if you change this one, just say, what if it came out at 160? You leave a lot more money in the deal. This is still a good deal.
Yep.
Like I would still take, earning $4,000 on 20 grand after accounting for all expenses. Like I still feel that's a good deal.
Yeah.
So you leave more money and it gets hard to scale, right? You'll run out of funds because you can't really borrow that money. You can borrow the money to make the acquisition happen, but at the end of the day, you have to leave money in the deal.
Right.
So if you're going to scale and continue to scale, you can't have too many of these, but like at the end of it's also not the end of the world. You can live with this.
Did your lender that's giving you this 6% 30-year fixed rate financing, did they tell you that you can only do 2 of these or 10 of these or 20 of these, or they cap you out at some point?
No, they haven't, but that doesn't mean they won't.
Right.
Right. Like that's, and it's not a bank, it's a pure lender. So that makes me feel a little bit better about it. Like, that this is the business that they're in to do.
Okay.
But you're like, it absolutely can call me around and be like, hey, we're not doing this.
Right. Okay. And where are you getting your kind of like estimated appraised value, your after repaired value in this case? I think what you say, assumed appraised value. Where are you getting that number from ahead of time? Are you pulling your own comps? Are you have a partner? Are you doing, what are you basing that on?
Yeah, no, I'll just pull comps.
Okay.
I'll go and just see what's sold in the last 6 months, make adjustments, try to be conservative about it, try to think like an appraiser, not an investor.
Sure.
Right. Like, cause I might say like, well, north of 111th is just completely different than south of 111th.
Mm-hmm.
And appraiser's not going to know that. Like he's going to take the comp from there. And if that helps you or hurts you, whatever. But like, you got to think of it like a lot of these guys are not in the area. They're just looking at, all right, here's the 4 closest comps and here's the number. And again, the other thing that I've kind of, while we're on that topic, what's kind of goofy is unlike multifamily where you can, it's your NOI and, the cap rate, and the appraised value is very calculated. It's not so much the case here. Like in the little area I have, there's these row homes that are, some are single family, some are 3 units, some are 4 units, some are duplexes. And, some appraisers will just treat a 3 unit like a duplex, which is, insane to me.
Yeah.
Just asinine. Like but it's also not like multifamily where it's, well, what's the NOI on it? It's like, they're not really looking at that, your monthly income for rent.
Yep.
So it's one of those things like being, 4 units or under, you lose a little bit of stability in knowing that final number. Like there's a little bit more risk on the table there.
Yeah, the duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes are kind of that weird hybrid animal where they're still owner occupant ish. They're not quite commercial properties, and so you do get caught in that middle there.
Yeah, the appraised value can be a little goofy. I would say the pro though on the flip side is you have a better exit strategy. Like you can find a house hacker. Like when you go to sell, you have a bigger pool to sell to.
Yep, I would agree with that too.
So
Yeah, let's move on to your IRR 5-year sheet, if you don't mind.
cool. So this pulls in. I'll walk through it, but this just pulls in everything from the first half. So there's really nothing to do here, except analyze and take a look. And all I do, I run it out to 5 years. A lot of these properties I plan on holding, but running IRR, in my opinion, like, because again, you're making assumptions on increases and appreciation. Like, to guess appreciation for 10 years is silly. To guess it for 5 years is borderline silly. Like, so I never like run it past this number, but I'd use it to give me more of a rough idea, not to say like, well, look, this is what I'm going to make. It's more of just to get an idea of, okay, does this make sense? And to, I guess, just run through the numbers. If you start in year 0, my acquisition cost from the first tab was $140K. It appraised at 176.5, so we got the loan for 132. That's what you see in B4.
Mm-hmm.
And so you see the net of that is that 9,800 you see in B16.
Okay.
And I apologize, that 9,800, it includes that first month rent.
Sure, that makes sense.
That's why it doesn't completely add up there.
Yep.
So like that is like the money out of pocket that you have. And we saw from the cash flow, I'm just going to go down here and then I'll explain the top ones in a second. You see the cash flow just every month. And the reason it's going up is, I assume, so in multifamily, I know, like on some of my bigger properties, I'll break down expenses and I'll break down rents, and I'll have them both go up. It ends up being almost a 2% increase in NOI. So I just summarize that on these smaller deals, if that makes sense.
Okay. You just assume that the overall net operating income number is going up by 2% per year.
That is correct.
Okay.
Because usually your rents are going to outpace, the cost of insurance going up, the cost of water going up, the cost of property taxes are probably the biggest one that can spoil this, and you need to be cognizant of it. But the other expenses, they're there, but they're also not going to go up you can increase rent at a quicker velocity, is what I'm trying to say. And so you have your net operating income going up by 2% year over year. Your debt stays the same. This is a fixed loan.
Yep.
Right? So that number is going to be the same in year 1 all the way up until I refi or whatever, or until it's paid off or whatever we do. The two other big attributes of IRR, at least my understanding of it, is it takes into account the loan pay down and also the property value. And the loan pay down is one that you can easily just calculate, right? This is off a 30-year loan. You see I'm at 130, 128. This is the loan being paid down. So in year 5 of the loan, I'm going to owe 122.
Okay.
I guess one thing to note on that, like I mentioned, the one small commercial bank I use, they'll do up to a 7-year ARM. They'll also only give me 25-year AM, which I used to complain about. And yeah, it hurts the cash flow a little, but it does. I mean, you kind of make it up in this area.
Sure.
As long as you're not living off that cash flow, like I used to get very upset about it, and I'm like, oh, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And then the property value, this is probably the biggest variable where you need to be the most careful. I do believe in this area. This is an area that the city of Chicago is pumping a ton of money into. There's a ton of revitalization happening. I do believe that this area is going to be, it's going to have a giant increase. I also understand where we are in the market though. So I'm not going to make any predictions of, we're going to get 7% after year 2 or, anything that I really think is going to happen, because 1, you can't bank on that. That's got to be gravy. And 2, the market as a whole at some point where, I'm not going to predict anything, but the odds of us being stagnant or going down are probably greater than the odds of us continuing to just rise at the pace we're doing.
Sure.
So the property value, I just assume 3%. You can change those numbers however you want. But I just assume 3% off of historical figures, especially if you're going to hold for a long time. The up and downs kind of get normalized if you hold this thing for 10 years, right? But that's where you get, 3%, 3%, 3%, 3%, 3%. So if things go as planned there, and it really did average out at 3% a year, maybe it went down a little and then it goes up or whatever. But if it averages out historically, that property that was worth 176 would be worth 204. And I would owe 122 on it in year 5.
Okay. So you're doing the difference between the new property value and the amount that you owe on the loan as part of your internal rate of return calculation. You're saying you get that equity amount at that year.
Correct. Like whenever you do IRR, you got to figure out when does it end. So I just ended at year 5 here, because like I think going too much further in the future, it gets a little crazy. Like
Yep.
you're making too many assumptions.
Yeah.
But it just shows the cash flow. The cash flow goes up a little bit because NOI, again, the rent increases can usually outpace the expenses.
Sure.
And then in year 5, if I sold, this is sold. It's the 204 minus the 122. And this is actually incorrect because I usually also account for 8% selling fee, 6% for the commission, and then another 2% for all the BS when you go to sell a property.
And so that doesn't take that into account, or it does?
It should. It does not. This is an older
Okay.
one. That's so like this number should be like 80 whatever. 80.
Sure.
It should be 92% of 86.
You're doing 8% of the equity amount, or 8% of the actual sale price.
It should be 8% of that sale price.
So it should be minus
Track it from here.
16K or something like that. So it should be like 70K.
Correct.
All right, cool. Yeah, so I don't usually use IRR.
That's a big miss. Like that's right.
Well,
like
it's only a big miss if you really are thinking about that as a sale, right? If you're thinking about what my internal rate of return is, if I didn't necessarily sell, but like what was my overall return that I got in equity buildup for that period of time, then it's not a miss, actually, right? I mean, because if you didn't sell it, if you just said, hey, listen, what did my money actually bring me? Then you could argue that that's not a miss at all. But
correct.
yeah. So I don't usually do a lot of IRR stuff. So like I don't have a sense for like what that number means to me, but I would assume 73% per year is probably pretty good. Is it a per year number, or is that like you're over the 5-year period, then you got to divide by 5?
It doesn't work out just dividing by 5. You see the calculation, like it's just I run it through Excel and a couple notes on it. One, it's super high because we don't have much money in the deal.
Yeah.
We paid $9,000 to get this.
Yeah, I guess that does make sense.
So like if you leave, let's say we left $20,000 instead of $9,000, all of a sudden it's like more towards realistic numbers of 30% or whatever it is. So it's definitely the one you're seeing here is it's super high and off the charts because the huge equity spread.
Okay.
But if we change that and like let's say here, this is like I'm just gonna do this if you don't mind, like so like when you buy turnkey, let's say. You're going to buy a property for 140. Let's say it appraises for one. You have a little bit of a spread there. This is probably more realistic for like a turnkey property, right?
Sure.
That's more realistic, like what you can expect in real estate on an IRR.
Okay. Yeah, I don't even look at IRR in our spreadsheet. I mean, it's there, and I haven't programmed it yet into our financial planner software, so I need to do that. But
yeah,
it's just not.
What would force me to do it was there's a larger deal that I'm currently chasing where I'm actually, I'm pulling an investor not to be on the debt side, but to be on the equity side. And so I really had to sit down and figure out, all right, if we want to exit in 3 years, 5 years, like what does it actually look like?
Yeah.
And what IRR does a good job of, it shows all the other values of real estate, right? For $9,000, you got to own this appreciation year over year, right? You only own you only have $9,000 into that property. Like you didn't put $150,000 or $170,000 into that property. You only put in 9, but you got the benefit of the appreciation over the entire baseline amount.
Right.
And then it also doesn't show the loan pay down. Like when you do your cash flow every month, they talk about the tenant paying down the loan. That's true. But like this actually quantifies it for you.
Yeah.
Where it gets goofy though is, if two things, one, if you change that appreciation to let's call it 0 or even negative because it could go down. And also let's say your numbers are just off from the get-go. Like you didn't account, your NOI isn't in this example, 4,700 because I changed the property value amount, but let's say it was really, 2,500. Like I guess my point is you can fudge the numbers however you want. So you need to be very careful and be very real with yourself. And if you're ever looking at anyone else's deal and they're trying to get you to invest or to buy the deal or whatever, like it's like a pro forma. Like you got to do it your own way.
Yep, totally. No, that makes a lot of sense to me. So like your criteria going into this, we talked sort of about this before, but you're looking at how much money I need to leave in the deal and what my cash flow is going to be on that, and less so about this IRR number.
Correct. I'd say that's accurate.
Yeah. And do you have a threshold, or is it just like a feel thing for the numbers?
It's case by case basis. I don't want to put just a blanket statement because
Yeah.
areas are all different. Um, the risk factors are all different. For example, like if I have to do even just an example where the numbers are the same, but the risk factor is different. If you purchase a property for 100K and do a 50K rehab, that's a lot safer than purchasing a property for 50 and doing a 100K rehab.
Yes.
Even though that all in number is the same, you're assuming more risk there and
Yes.
a longer hold time and all those good things. So like you, I don't want to just throw a blanket statement out there on that. Um, in general, I look to cash flow positive, a couple $100. And that's after the vacancy, after the expenses. If it can't do that, it's a deal breaker. But once it can do that, then I look at, okay, can we create net worth here? Net worth meaning the equity spread. And then what does that equity spread look like in 5 years? Which you can kind of use IRR to just model. It's not exact, like it's nowhere near as exact as the first tab. That's much more realistic.
Yeah.
This is more prediction than what is.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. So that's awesome. Was there anything else on sheet one, or is this pretty much like the entirety of your analysis kind of?
This is it.
Okay, awesome.
This is what I do.
Yeah, I mean, is there anything else you want to kind of add or sum up at the end, or is this pretty much like how you look at deals, or anything you want to add to it?
No, this is what I do. What I used to do, which may be helpful if someone's like, when I was less sure about the area, less sure about my numbers,
Hmm.
I would actually take like this first tab here, and I would almost run this twice. So I'd run like one up here, and I'd copy and paste and run one down here, and I'd run like my worst case scenario. Like
Okay.
I don't know if rents are going to be 1,100 or 1,000 a unit, and I would just run, and I don't know if my vacancy is 10% or 5%, and I would run one up here that like what I think it's going to be, and I'd run that. I'd call it my worst case scenario. Like take
Okay.
everything, make your rehab 10% more, make your vacancy double what it's going to be. Assume the taxes go up. Assume your rent comes in low. Like just assume the mortgage rate's a half point higher, and you only get 300 months instead of 360. Like just take every little factor and plug it that way, and assume that it all goes wrong, and just see where you net out. It's not going to look sexy, but like that's kind of like that used to give me the comfort to move forward. Like, all right, if this all happens, I'm not losing money. Like I'm still going to make money, and yes, I could probably invest my money elsewhere. But like, if all these bad things happen to me, like all 10 of them, I'm still okay. Like I'm still not coming out of pocket. Like it
And
just gives you that little bit of insurance of, you know, because there's risk in anything you do. So like
totally.
you got to account for it, and you can't just sit there and. I feel a lot of people just sit there and go like, oh, this could happen, so I'm not going to do it. Like, well, you can quantify that a little bit. Like, what is the absolute worst case scenario, and what's the likelihood of it, and can I still make a deal happen?
And so for doing your worst case one, are you when you like come out of here, is there like minimum criteria that, if this is negative $100 a month in cash flow with your worst case and you got to leave $20,000 in the deal, that's like an automatic no? Or like, do you have thresholds at all on the worst case numbers?
That would probably be a no to me.
Okay.
I don't do that anymore just because I have a good grasp of my little projects. If I went to a new area or like a new like asset class or something, I would do that again, right? Um, in my little area here, I do have a good feel for it. Um, but yeah, like it would basically be like if I'm not positive on the cash flow, like that's a deal breaker number one. Like that's kind of like my binary yay or nay off the
Okay.
get go.
How much time do you think it takes for you to analyze a deal at this point?
Not long. I mean, remember these are not multifamily. These are pretty simple little guys. Uh, first off, I know if a homeowner calls me and if I can figure out the rehab and I can figure out the purchase price, like I pretty much know the ARV, give or take a little bit because I'm in the area, and I pretty much know the rental income, and almost anything you see in column E is going to be almost exact. Like there's going to be little changes there, but like you're going to be able to sniff out in 30 seconds, like, hey, this is going to work or not.
So you're doing
Right?
like cookie cutter deals where they're all very, very, very similar.
Yeah, I wouldn't say cookie cutter, but yeah, like like in this example, if I can be all in for 140 and like I'll just I changed this earlier because we were talking about like that turnkey, but like if I know like my appraisal is going to come back 165 to 175, I know that if I can get all in for 140, this deal's probably going to work.
Right.
Like I know the rents are going to be. I know what the rents are going to be. They're going to be around 1,100 a side. Um, so like it's not a lot. Otherwise, if I need to look at a deal, I mean, we're talking just a couple minutes. Like it's not. I wouldn't spend more than that. Like it's pretty straightforward. I think one of the things I've gotten better at is I also don't chase. Like wholesaler sends you something like, oh, I don't know this area, but let me take a look at it. Oh man, this might pencil out. Like I just don't do that.
Yeah.
Like I know what I do and I know what I like, and like it's 100% in on that.
Yeah. Are you paying like full retail for your rehab stuff, or are you able to get like wholesale-ish type rates for having your rehab done?
So it's funny you say that. Basically, what happens, I have a GC that I partner with very well. He's getting very very good wholesale rates, and then like I'm almost retail. I'd say I'm somewhere in between. Like I got to pay him his cut.
Okay.
Um, and the way we work it out is his GC fee with me is about half of what it should be, but then I make it up to him when we do flips. I give him a decent portion of our flip. So like we he ends up giving on these rentals. I end up paying a lot less, not a lot less. I end up paying less than I should. And like on flips, it's almost full retail because on the back end, I give him X amount of the profits, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. So
Different,
like on this
different way to
one,
break it
if
up.
if if someone were coming in and they were going to do this deal and they had to do the rehab and they were not able to cut a great deal, is it going to be 75K? It's going to like
Uh,
10K more?
maybe I'd love this. My head's saying, yeah, man, I get 10K discounts. I really don't know if that's what it is. So
Okay.
I bet you that gap is smaller.
Okay. Okay. That's interesting. Yeah, that's pretty cool. Well, I really appreciate you coming on and kind of walking through a deal. I mean, it's super interesting to see how you analyze your deals and kind of seeing how these deals work. If people do want to reach out to you afterward, do you want me to put your contact information in show notes or anything like that?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Yeah, feel free. Feel free. Tom Shallcross. You can find me. I'm on Bigger Pockets, so you can find me there. Email me at N as in Nancy, S as in Sam, properties plural, so PROPERTIS 723 at Gmail. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm not much of a social media guy though, but you can find me there. And yeah, I'm always happy to talk about this. This is love talking about these different types of deals. So if there's questions or whatever, would love to have that convo.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I'll go put that contact information in the show notes as well, so that they don't have to try to pause it and go back and write it down. So we'll put it in there for you. But thanks again for taking time and coming on and kind of walking us through a deal. And we really, really do appreciate it. So
Awesome. No, appreciate it, James.
thanks so much. I'll talk to you soon, Tom.
All right, good deal.